You begin this moment by realizing that nothing in your outer world has authority over the inner state you are about to generate. Because the moment you draw your attention inward, you reclaim the most powerful resource you possess, your awareness. And as you breathe deeply and deliberately, you start to loosen the grip of the familiar emotions that have rehearsed your past again and again, recognizing that every emotion you've memorized has wired you into an old identity, and today you are no longer interested in surviving as the same person who reacted, doubted, hesitated, or waited for permission. Today you understand that your personality creates your personal reality, and if you want a new life, you must become someone new, not by force, but by coherence, by aligning thought, feeling, and intention into a single elevated signal that your body has never felt consistently before. And as you slow down your breathing, you are signaling to your nervous system that there is no emergency, no rush, no threat, and in that safety, the body becomes receptive instead of defensive, plastic instead of rigid, ready to be reprogrammed instead of replaying the same subconscious loops. Because you now see clearly that most of your life has been lived by default, driven by habits of thought and emotional reactions that once served you but no longer define who you are becoming. And the moment you observe, then without judgment, they begin to lose their power. Because awareness is the first step out of unconsciousness. And unconsciousness is nothing more than living in the known, addicted to the predictable chemistry of stress, worry, anticipation, control, or even motivation that depends on external outcomes. But now you choose something different. You choose to generate the emotion first, without waiting for the event, because you understand that. The brain does not know the difference between a vividly imagined experience and a real one. And every time you feel gratitude, confidence, wholeness, or certainty without reason, you are instructing your genes, your cells, and your nervous system to reorganize around a new future. And as you sit in this awareness, you can feel the pull of the old self trying to reclaim attention, whispering familiar narratives about limitations, timelines, and past evidence. But you no longer argue with it because resistance feeds it energy. Instead, you gently return to the present moment, knowing that the present moment is the only place where change can occur, the only place where the past loosens its grip and the future can be rehearsed neurologically and emotionally. And as you bring your attention to your heart, you begin to sense a subtle expansion. Because when thought slows and emotion elevates, coherence naturally emerges. And coherence is the state in which the body and mind stop broadcasting chaos and start transmitting clarity. And in that clarity, you ask a different question, not what's wrong with me, but who am I choosing to be right now? And the moment you ask that question sincerely, the field of possibilities opens, because identity is not fixed, it is practiced. And every moment you practice a new state of being, you lay down new neural circuits, and neurons that fire together, wire together. And with repetition and emotion, those circuits become the new automatic, the new default, the new you. And you realize that transformation is not about forcing outcomes or chasing goals, but about embodying the energy of the future self so completely that the body begins to believe it is already there. And when the body believes, it no longer resists change, it cooperates, it reorganizes, it follows the mind instead of dragging it backward. And as you sit here, you begin to feel a quiet confidence, not the loud kind that needs validation, but the grounded kind that comes from internal alignment, the kind that says, I am safe to be greater than my past. And in that safety, you let go of the need to control how or when. Things will happen because control is rooted in fear. And fear collapses possibility, but surrender paired with intention expands it. And surrender does not mean giving up. It means trusting that once you've set the internal state, the external world will reorganize in ways you could not predict with the analytical mind. And this is where the magic lives, not as fantasy, but as biology responding to coherence, as the quantum field responding to a clear signal. And you are learning now to live from the inside out, to stop waiting for motivation and become the source of it, to stop reacting to circumstances and start authoring experiences. And as you remain in this state, you can feel the body softening, the breath deepening, the mind becoming less fragmented and more unified. And this unity is not something you have to earn. It is something you remember, because beneath all the conditioning, the striving, and the self-correction, there has always been an intelligent, creative force within you that knows how to heal, how to adapt, how to grow, and how to express more life. And today you are giving it permission by stepping out of the way, by choosing presence over prediction, by choosing feeling over force, and by choosing to rehearse a future that feels so real that your nervous system begins to calibrate to it. And as you do, you may notice subtle shifts, warmth in the chest, clarity in the mind, a sense of expansion or stillness. These are not imagination, they are signals of alignment, evidence that the body is no longer anchored to the past, but tuning itself to a new frequency. And you understand now that every day is not about doing more, but about being more, because when you change your state of being, your actions naturally change. your perceptions sharpen, your choices become cleaner, and your energy becomes contagious. And without effort, you begin to move through the day differently, speaking differently, listening differently, responding differently, not because you tried to fix yourself, but because you remembered who you are beneath the patterns. And this remembrance is the true beginning of transformation. The moment when the old self no longer dominates the narrative and the future self begins to lead quietly, steadily, and with certainty. As you remain anchored in this state of presence, you begin to understand that the true work is not about changing the world outside of you, but about sustaining an inner environment so coherent, so elevated, that the external world has no choice but to respond, because every system, biological, psychological, energetic, responds to signal. And right now you are learning how to refine yours, how to move from unconscious reaction to deliberate creation. And this shift begins with recognizing that emotions are not consequences of life, they are instructions to the body. And for years, the body may have been conditioned to live in survival chemistry, stress hormones flooding the system, narrowing perception, reinforcing separation. But today you are interrupting that conditioning, not by fighting it, but by replacing it with something greater, something more ordered, something that carries information of a future that has not yet occurred, but is already being rehearsed within your nervous system. And as you feel into this elevated emotion, whether it is gratitude without cause, confidence without proof, or wholeness without condition, you are literally changing the signal you broadcast into the field, because the heart generates an electromagnetic field far more powerful than the brain. And when the heart and brain synchronize, you move from fragmentation into unity. And unity is where creation becomes effortless, because there is no internal conflict siphoning energy, no subconscious resistance pulling you back into the familiar. And in this coherence, you start to sense that the future you desire is not somewhere ahead of you in time, but available to you now as a state of being. And the moment you embody it emotionally, the timeline begins to collapse, because time is not as linear as the analytical mind believes. It is experiential. It bends to attention and feeling. And as you stay with this awareness, you may notice the impulse to get up, to check something, to distract yourself, because the body is still learning how to live without the constant stimulation of the known. But instead of obeying that impulse, you soften into it, understanding that discomfort is often the signal that change is occurring, that the old self is losing territory, and the body is recalibrating to a new normal. And this is where mastery is developed, not in peak moments, but in sustained presence, in the ability to remain conscious even when the mind tries to pull you back into stories, memories, or anticipations. And every time you gently return to the present moment, you are strengthening the neural networks of intention and weakening the networks of habit. And with repetition, those intentions begin to feel natural, automatic, embodied, and you realize that willpower is not required when identity shifts, because behavior follows being, and being follows practice, and practice follows awareness. And as you stay here, you begin to ask yourself not what you want to achieve, but what energy you want to live from, because achievements are temporary, but states of being become lifestyles. And a person who lives from clarity will naturally make clear decisions. A person who lives from confidence will naturally take aligned action. And a person who lives from wholeness will no longer seek validation, permission, or completion outside themselves. And this is where freedom begins. Not freedom from responsibility, but freedom from dependence on circumstances to feel alive. And as you embody this freedom, you start to sense a deeper intelligence moving through you, an organizing principle that knows exactly how to guide you if you stop interfering with doubt and overanalysis. And this intelligence does not shout, it whispers. It communicates through subtle feelings, intuitive nudges, synchronicities that only appear when you are present enough to notice them. And you are becoming that present now, because presence is not passive, it is alert, receptive, awake. And from this state, you begin to see opportunities where you once saw obstacles, options where you once saw limits, because perception changes when emotion changes, and emotion changes when identity shifts. And you are no longer the person who waits for certainty before moving. You are becoming the person who generates certainty by moving from alignment. And this does not mean every step will be comfortable, but it will be coherent. And coherence feels like quiet knowing rather than loud motivation. And as you internalize this, you realize that motivation driven by fear eventually burns out, but inspiration generated from coherence renews itself, because it is not chasing something outside of you, it is expressing something already alive within you. And this expression begins to show up in how you speak, how you listen, how you hold your body, how you respond to challenge, because the body is always listening to the mind. And when the mind speaks a new language of possibility, the body begins to move differently through space and time. And others will feel this before they understand it, because coherence is contagious, alignment is noticeable, and authenticity resonates without effort. And you are not doing this to influence others, but it will naturally occur as a byproduct of internal order. And as you continue to breathe slowly and deliberately, you feel the nervous system settling into this new rhythm, teaching the body that it is safe to create, safe to express, safe to expand. And in this safety, you let go of old timelines, old comparisons, old identities that were built from reaction rather than intention. And you understand now that the moment you stop defining yourself by your past, the past loses its emotional charge. It becomes information rather than identity. And information can be used wisely, integrated, transcended. And as you do this, you are no longer waiting for a breakthrough, because you realize that this moment of coherence is the breakthrough. This sustained state of elevated emotion is the new platform from which your life will reorganize. And you trust this not because you are hoping, but because you are feeling it. And the body does not lie. It responds honestly to the signals it receives. And right now it is receiving a clear message that you are no longer living in survival. You are living in creation. And from this state, you carry yourself forward, knowing that every choice you make today will be informed by this coherence, and every moment you return to it, you strengthen it, until it is no longer something you practice, but something you are. Now, as you prepare to carry this state beyond this moment and into the living movement of your day, you recognize that integration is where transformation becomes reality, because insight without embodiment fades, but embodiment repeated becomes identity, and identity lived consistently becomes destiny. And you are no longer waiting for ideal conditions to feel aligned, because you understand that alignment creates ideal conditions, not the other way around. And as you imagine yourself moving through the next hours of your day, you do not visualize specific outcomes so much as you rehearse the energy with which you will meet whatever arises. Steady, open, present, and grounded, knowing that the future self you are becoming is revealed not in grand gestures, but in subtle choices, in how you pause before reacting, how you listen instead of interrupting, how you breathe instead of tightening. And each of these moments becomes a reinforcement of the new neural and emotional circuitry you have been cultivating, because the brain is always learning, the body is always adapting, and the question is no longer whether change is happening, but whether it is happening by design or by default. And today you choose design. You choose to move deliberately from coherence rather than unconsciously from habit. And as you do this, you may notice that challenges do not disappear, but your relationship to them transforms. Because when you are anchored internally, external events lose their power to destabilize you. They become feedback rather than threats, information rather than judgments. And this shift alone conserves enormous amounts of energy that was once wasted on resistance, self-criticism, or mental rehearsal of worst-case scenarios. And with that reclaimed energy, you begin to feel more alive, more creative, more responsive to life rather than reactive to it. And you realize that this vitality is not something you need to chase. It is the natural result of alignment, because when thought, emotion, and action move in the same direction, energy flows without friction. And friction is what once made life feel heavy, effortful, or draining. And as friction dissolves, you experience a sense of ease that is not complacency, but confidence, a knowing that you can meet whatever comes from a stable center rather than a fragmented one. And this center becomes your new reference point, the place you return to when the mind tries to rush ahead or the body tries to fall back into old chemistry. And each time you return, you strengthen the signal, teaching the body that this state is not temporary, not reserved for meditation or quiet moments, but available in motion and conversation and decision-making and uncertainty. And this is where mastery is born, not from controlling life, but from regulating self. And self-regulation is the highest form of power, because a regulated nervous system can perceive more clearly, choose more wisely, and respond more creatively. And as you walk, speak, work, or rest today, you do so with an awareness that you are always teaching your body who you are. And today you teach it that you are safe in the unknown, capable in uncertainty, and open in the face of change. And this teaching is not done through affirmations alone, but through presence, through consistency, through the subtle emotional tone you carry into each interaction. And as this tone stabilizes, others may notice that you seem calmer, clearer, more grounded. And this is not because you have everything figured out, but because you are no longer at war with yourself. And inner peace is not the absence of challenge. It is the absence of internal contradiction. And from this peace, you act with precision rather than urgency, with intention rather than impulse, and you begin to trust your timing, your instincts, your capacity to adapt, because trust grows naturally when you keep promises to yourself, even small ones like returning to the breath, choosing a wareen. SS over reaction, or pausing before responding, and these small acts compound. They build evidence not in the external world, but in the nervous system. And the nervous system is the foundation of confidence, and as confidence stabilizes, fear loses its grip, not because you eliminated it, but because it is no longer in charge. And you understand now that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to move from coherence instead of contraction. And as you commit to living from this place, you are no longer seeking motivation to boost your day, because your day becomes an expression of the state you cultivated within. And this state travels with you, informing your posture, your tone, your focus, your energy. And even when moments of distraction or doubt arise, as they inevitably will, you meet them with compassion rather than criticism, knowing that kindness towards self sustains change far longer than force ever could. And in this kindness, you reaffirm your commitment not to perfection, but to presence, not to control, but to coherence, not to becoming someone else, but to fully inhabiting who you are capable of being. And as the day unfolds, you move forward with a quiet certainty, not demanding proof, not rushing results, but trusting the process you are now part of. Because you are no longer separate from creation, you are participating in it consciously, and this participation is your power, your responsibility, and your gift. And you carry it with you now, grounded, awake, and aligned, knowing that every moment you return to this state, you reinforce the future you are already becoming